I'm joined today by Dr. Brokoslaw Laschowski, whose research in robotics is centered on improving health and performance by merging humans with robotics and artificial intelligence. His research applications range from robotic legs for persons with mobility impairments, that's including autonomous control using reinforcement learning and neural control using brain-machine interfaces, to computer vision glasses for persons with visual impairments. Dr. Laschowski is currently a research scientist and principal investigator with the Artificial Intelligence and Robotics in Rehabilitation team at the Toronto Rehab Institute, and an assistant professor in the Department of Mechanical and Industrial Engineering at the University of Toronto. He specializes in the field of biomechatronics, that is the integration of humans and machines. I'm so grateful that you can join me today.
Yes, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'd love for you, to give us your overview of what it is that you do, or perhaps frame it for me, from computer vision and machine learning to neural networks and wearables. That's a lot. Your academic path through robotics shows an impressive range. So do tell me, tell us about your path and your vision for your career.
So my path, I would say, is like somewhat unconventional. Before I got into engineering and robotics, my background is actually in neuroscience and human motor control. So I got really passionate during my undergrad and in my first master's using physics and mathematics to try to be able to understand how does the brain control human movement. That then lends itself pretty nicely to then developing artificial systems to allow robots to then think and move like humans. And so I often explain to people that, like, at its core, my lab, we specialize in designing machines that think, see, and move like humans. And there's kind of two reasons why someone would do that. One is so you can design autonomous machines. So think of like walking robots. They can see, they can think, and they can move, again, like humans. The other application, and the one that we often get a lot of attention for, is not automation, but integration. So it's merging humans with these machines. And some really well-known examples of that, as you mentioned, are like robotic prosthetic legs for our patients with leg amputation, or smart glasses for patients with vision loss, or brain-machine interfaces to be able to connect human motor control to a computer or a robot or some other type of mechatronic system. And so that's kind of really, my lab is very much a reflection on my personal journey, where I have formal training and education in both neuroscience and human motor control, but then also in like engineering and robotics and machine learning. And so that's really reflected in my lab, in that we focus kind of on both sides of these, both the biology side, but then also the mechatronics and robotics side. We try to be able to merge these two in order to, at the end of the day, improve health and performance. And so if we're trying to help a patient population be able to see or to be able to walk, great. If we're trying to design robots that can maybe go in the wild and help with search and rescue, firefighting, there's a lot of applications for developing autonomous humanoid robots. And so that's like a little bit of a snapshot and somewhat of a lay summary of myself and what my research lab specializes in.
That's terrific. And it's a great way to frame our conversation. Although we will be coming at this from, I'd say, the more the robotics and or motion control as well. I'd like to zoom in on your work in robotic lower limb exoskeletons, if you don't mind, and prosthesis. Can you help us understand at a high level what types of technologies are employed in providing autonomy and control? And I'm certainly thinking about, what types of sensors are involved, what types of artificial intelligence are you focusing on, and motion systems. How does the user activate the system?
So it's really important for me to emphasize that robotic prosthetic legs and exoskeletons are really just a system for visualization of what we really specialize in. I wouldn't say that my lab is an exoskeleton or prosthetics lab. We really focus on the underlying technologies to be able to advance these types of robotic systems. So that's why I often don't use the word prosthetics or exoskeletons. I just say robots, because at the end of the day, we're interested in robotics and machine learning. We use prosthetics and exoskeletons as an expression of what we really do. In my lab, we're really mostly interested in control. Design is an aspect of that, and we have designed several of our own robots in the past, and there's some novelty with some of the designs that we've done. But I'd say we're really interested in learning optimization and control. Now, when we're talking about having robots to be able to control themselves, so-called autonomous control or automated control, we have some high-level system that's essentially responsible for inferring what the robot should be doing. And so if we have, say, for example, a patient walking with a robotic prosthetic leg, we have sensors on the robot, like goniometers or inertial measurement units. In our case, we do a lot of work with vision. So we have cameras that are strapped to the human and or the robot. And we use various sensor fusion methods and machine learning models to be able to infer what does the patient want to do. And then we use that for then selecting a specific locomotion mode controller. So you can almost imagine that we discretize locomotion into different controllers. You're going to have a separate controller for sitting down. You're going to have a separate controller walking up, standing up. You're going to have a separate controller for running, for jumping, walking upstairs, walking downstairs. Then there's this need for high-level switching between these different types of controllers. And that's really where artificial intelligence comes in, where we can do pattern recognition of the various onboard sensors, again, using some type of sensor fusion method as well, and infer what type of activity does the patient want to do. Then we can select the corresponding controller for that given activity. My lab, the two sensors that we focus on for this high-level control are, or actually there's three, I guess you can say. One is computer vision. This is probably the one we're best known for, where we're almost like developing the Tesla of prosthetic legs. We're using cameras to be able to sense the environment and then use that for path planning and control. We're also now getting into the space of neural interfaces, where we're using electroencephalography, or EEG, which is a non-invasive sensor to be able to read brain activity during motor imagery. So as the patient is thinking about doing some movement, we're able to then decode those neural signals and be able to estimate the patient's intent. Or perhaps the patient is actually doing the movement, and then we're again able to decode what is the patient doing and then translate that information to the robot. So that's our work in EEG. We're doing the exact same thing at the muscle level. So as opposed to reading signals from the brain, we can read them from the muscles. And that's using a sensor known as surface electromyography. Those are some of the work that we're doing for high-level control, where we're essentially trying to determine what type of activity does the patient want to do. And for a given activity, we also want to automate that as well. And that's what we refer to as mid-level control. I don't do a lot of low-level control. This is kind of like closed-loop PID control. That's a pretty well-established field. I think there's less room for innovation on that particular level. And also as a neuroscientist, that's not really where my expertise would lie. That's just kind of straight up control systems engineering. But in terms of mid-level control, so our high-level AI controller has now determined what type of activity the patient wants to do. And again, all of this is automated. It's fully autonomous. Then the robot has to decide, okay, now for this given activity, how do I walk from point A to point B? And there's two methods that we use in order to do that. One is reinforcement learning, where as opposed to kind of coding using mathematics, how like to move from point A to point B, we can learn through experiences. And so now in the context of a patient walking with a robot, getting that type of experimental data can be like time consuming and very resource intensive. And it also could be quite dangerous, because if the robot is just learning how to walk, you probably don't want a patient interacting with that device yet. So that's where a lot of our simulation work comes in. We do a lot of work in computer simulation, and this allows us to optimize our controllers, to be able to design and optimize our controllers very cheaply, very reliably, all in simulation. And these simulations are physics-based simulations. And so we're able to capture underlying physics. This is not just computer graphics. And this is becoming increasingly more popular. We see companies like OpenAI and NVIDIA and many other large tech companies, Meta, they're doing a lot more and more optimization and controls research in physics-based computer simulation. And so we're doing something very similar. So that's some of our work on reinforcement learning, where we're trying to teach the robotic leg how to move. And in that framework, we specify that the optimal solution should be what's known as biomimicry. So we assume that the optimal solution for a robot is to walk the way in which a human would walk. And that's not necessarily the case. It's possible that because the anthropometrics of a patient, say with like an amputation, for example, would differ than, say, an able-bodied individual like myself, the physics are different, the system dynamics are different. And so, so that may require a different policy. It may require some different biomechanics. We haven't gotten there yet. That's a little bit more of a complicated problem. But right now we assume, let's program the robot or have the robot learn how to walk in a way that mimics human walking. So that's our work in mid-level control using reinforcement learning. I did mention that we use another method, and that's optimal control, which is kind of, think of it like the non-data-driven version of reinforcement learning. It's not quite accurate, but you can almost think of it like that. And with optimal control, what I'm really interested in is what's known as inverse optimal control. And this kind of relates back to what I was talking about with the reinforcement learning, where we assume the optimal solution is to have the robot mimic human walking. Well, that begs the question, what are humans doing? How do humans walk from point A to point B? Like, what are we optimizing? And so for inverse optimal control, you are trying to evaluate what is the underlying objective function that is being minimized or maximized within this optimization framework. And that's what I'm really interested in. So there's a lot of experimental evidence to show, and theoretical evidence to show, that humans have evolved over time to be able to move in such a way as to, say, minimize metabolic energy. This is just like from an evolutionary perspective, we're able to conserve energy so that in this way, if we're being chased by a predator, we then have that extra energy to be able to run away. But what happens when you're not just walking through everyday life? Maybe you want to go run and catch the bus. What's your optimization routine look like then? Is it just maximize speed? Do you care about metabolic energy in that respect? What happens if you have an amputation? Or what if you have a stroke? What's the objective function then? When you see somebody with, say, an amputation, or somebody who has a stroke or some type of paralysis and they're walking, what is their brain doing? What is it solving? What is it prioritizing? And this is some of the theoretical neuroscience work that I was working on, where if we can try to decode how humans walk, what is our brain prioritizing when we're walking from point A to point B? The theory is that if we can develop that mathematics, if we can develop these machine learning models, we can then program that intelligence into a robotic leg to be able to move with the same level of agility and versatility as humans. So that's like a little bit of a very long-winded answer to your question, where at the highest level, we're using EEG and EMG sensors to record neural activity, and we're using computer vision. And we're using all of this with sensor fusion and machine learning to decode what does the patient want to do. This is then translated to the mid-level controller, which uses either reinforcement learning or optimal control to be able to decide, okay, now for this given activity, how should the patient walk from point A to point B with this robotic leg?